Hola, buenas tardes a todos. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Please come in, sit down. Bien, vamos a comenzar ya con la sesión de tarde. Y bueno, la sesión principal es la ponencia que va a impartir Klaus Grunert. Yo voy a hacer una breve introducción de Klaus. Klaus es, aparte de la información que tenéis en el programa, que es bastante explícita, sencillamente comentaros que Klaus Grunert es un profesor de marketing de la Universidad de Aarhus, en Dinamarca, y resumiéndolo mucho, lo mejor que podemos decir es que es una de las principales referencias que hay hoy en día en materia de comportamiento del consumidor, fundamentalmente enfocado a todo lo relacionado con el consumo de alimentos. Entonces, pues bueno, y a partir de ahí, pues, Klaus tiene un montón de publicaciones por completar algo de lo que no aparece en el programa. Pues sencillamente resumir que, por ejemplo, en ResearchGate tiene más de 20.000 citas, o que tiene más de 500 contribuciones en Google Scholar. Entonces, sencillamente resumiendo, podemos decir que estamos ante una de las principales referencias a nivel mundial del mundo del comportamiento del consumidor en materia de alimentos. Klaus, thank you very much for accepting our invitation and for being here with us today. I mean, you can start whenever you want. Okay? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for the introduction. I didn't understand what you said, but I'm sure you said some nice things about me. So I want to talk here today about some developments in consumer behavior and what they mean with regard to the opportunities for the olive oil sector. And let me start by saying I'm not a specialist in olive oil. I'm a specialist in consumer behavior, and I want to talk about some developments there, and I will refer to olive oil every now and then, also have a few examples from research in that area. But my main contribution, I hope so, is here to make some general statements about changes in consumer behavior and what the possible implications could be for the olive oil sector. And the background, like we have heard many times at this Congress here, is what we call the green transition of the food sector. We all know what that is and why it's important. It's this attempt to turn the food sector into one which produces healthier food products, which produces more sustainable food products, and food products that are affordable to everyone. And we know there's a lot of policies at all levels going on in order to further that transition process. And as we know, consumers have a special role in that kind of transition because consumers can both delay and accelerate these kinds of changes. We know that consumers can delay the adoption of new products and new technologies. One of the examples that we all know is genetic modification years ago. But on the other hand, also, if there is demand from consumers, it can also accelerate transitions. And I think in the development or in the discussion about the green transition, many times we view consumers more as a barrier than as an opportunity. We view them as a barrier because experience shows it has been difficult getting consumers to adopt healthy diets. People say consumers still eat a lot of meat, even though that maybe is not so sustainable, and so on. So we concentrate many times on the barriers. I think we should concentrate on the opportunities, on the positive possibilities resulting from the green transition. And I think olive oil is actually a pretty good point in that respect. And in order to understand the opportunities that the green transition gives on the market from a consumer behavior perspective, I think it's important to realize that food for the consumer is first of all a source of well-being. It's also a source of nutrients and all kinds of other things, but it is first of all a source of well-being. So this concept of well-being, I take that as a central element in what I'm trying to present to you here today. And well-being is a fuzzy concept, but there's a lot of research on well-being, and it's commonly agreed it has an objective part and it has a subjective part. And when we talk about consumer behavior, what drives consumer behavior, of course, is a subjective well-being. What consumers think will contribute to their personal feeling of well-being. And in research on well-being and in research on subjective well-being, it's commonly accepted that well-being, subjective well-being, has two components, namely a cognitive component which has to do with satisfaction and an affective component that has to do with happiness. And in research on quality of life, we know that these two elements are not the same. If I ask somebody, are you satisfied with your life? Are you satisfied with your job, with your income, with your health? People say, yes, I'm satisfied. And then if we then ask people, are you happy with your life? People say, maybe not always. So the satisfaction and the happiness don't always go hand in hand. And that goes in general with regard to life in general, but that also goes with regard to food. And let me try to explain as I go along what I mean with that. But this figure here summarizes this basic idea here. We have well-being, objective and subjective, and the subjective well-being has two components, the satisfaction and the happiness. And both play a role in consumer behavior when they choose food products, including olive oil. But the type of consumer behavior processes that play a role here differ. Because whether people are satisfied with a product, for example, that they buy, is a question of conscious reasoning. They compare the product with the expectations, they process the information they've got the product, and so on. So satisfaction is a result of cognitive processing, whereas happiness is more something that happens spontaneously. And you cannot always explain why you're happy or why you have a positive feeling with regard to something and not with regard to something else. That distinction is well described in many areas in the social sciences, including consumer behavior. Some of you may know the Nobel Prize winner in economics, Daniel Kahneman, who was a psychologist who dealt with human behavior, including economic behavior. And he, in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, distinguishes between two systems of the mind, System 1 and System 2. System 2 is a conscious reasoning. We think about things and then arrive at a conclusion, whereas System 1 is a spontaneous effect, the intuition and that kind of thing. And both of these play a role in consumer behavior, and many times the System 1, the spontaneous reaction, which can be positive or negative, actually is more important than the conscious reasoning. And that's something that I want to apply in the following here. So what I'll do now, I will go through three main trends, and you have all heard about them before. It's health, sustainability, and authenticity. We know these are trends also in consumer behavior: more health, more sustainability, more authenticity, and I will discuss them from this, with this well-being focus. And then I will try to draw some inferences with regard to what that means with regard to olive oil. So if we start with health, the health trend in food, of course, has been going on for a long time, has been going on for decades. So for decades, we have been explaining to consumers that there is this link between the diet and the health, good and bad nutrients. We had a lot of effort going into nutrition labeling, informing people about what are good and what are not so good nutrients. We had reformulated products so that they become healthier. We have functional products with health claims, but many consumers also have this idea that there is some contrast. That if it's healthy, it's probably not very pleasurable and tasty, and if it's tasty and pleasurable, it's probably not very healthy. And that has been one of the major barriers that we have had in trying to promote healthier eating among consumers. And this figure here, which is based on some research that some of my colleagues and myself have been doing a few years ago, shows this, because this figure here is a result of analyzing how people think about and talk about this relationship between food and health. And we have two dimensions. We have the vertical dimension, experientialism versus functionalism, whereas functionalism means you view food as a bundle of nutrients and you optimize your intake of nutrients, whereas experientialism means food is a holistic experience which is supposed to be pleasurable. And then we have another axis, idealism versus pragmatism. If you're on the left side, you make no compromises. Either you optimize all your food intake according to the nutrients, and the pleasure is not so important, or the other way around, you go only after the pleasure, don't care about all this health talk. Most of us are in this ordinary category. We try to make compromises. We want to eat what we like, but still try not to eat too unhealthy. And a few people are in the resigned box there. They have learned what it means to eat healthily, but they have sort of concluded, I cannot find out how to do that. For me, it doesn't seem to be possible. But this whole figure is only relevant, comes only about because people perceive this discrepancy that it's not possible, or at least difficult, to have the right bundle of nutrients and the overall pleasure here at the same time. And one of the examples, one of the specific cases where that is being expressed, which also is relevant for all, is the role of health claims. Health claims have been hailed as a major communication instrument in informing consumers about the positive health properties of a particular food product. And we know there has been a lot of legislation and a lot of bureaucracy and so on, but we are now in a situation where certain health claims can be used on the market. And we have a few examples here on the right. Regarding olive oil, one is the official EU-approved one is from the US, and one is a reformulation from the EU one. And we find these claims on products, which raises a couple of questions. Namely, do people read them? And if people read them, do they understand them? And if they understand them, does it have any impact on people's choices? And we do know by now quite a bit about how health claims affect consumer behavior, because there has been quite a lot of research in that area. The short answers to these three questions here is, well, actually most health claims are not read. Most health claims are ignored in the store. And if people read them, many people find them difficult to understand. And even if people read them and believe they understand them, relatively few consumers use them in their decision making. This is from a study I was involved in a few years ago, which actually was about olive oil, where we tried to look at these three health claims that I've already shown you and analyze people's ability to understand them, using a method that was developed by Danone, which classifies people into a safe, a risky, or an other interpretation of the health claim. Other means people say, oh, it means the product is good for you, which basically means they don't say really anything. Risky means they overgeneralize usually what it says, and the safe is they interpret it in a way which is what was intended to do. And as you can see, without going into the details, a lot of people actually either say something blah blah when you ask them what the health claim means, quite sizable proportion overinterprets them, and some also interpret it in the right way. Actually, the US approved one there is the one which got, at least in the Danish sample here, got the highest percentage of correct interpretations. But this all this business about health claims here, coming back to what I said before, is a system 2 approach to healthy eating. Because what we try to do is we communicate to people something that is relatively difficult to understand. We assume people read it, process the information, link it to everything else that may be relevant in making a decision, and then maybe it has an impact on the healthiness of their diet. We have aspects of the health trend which are completely different. We have something which is called superfoods. And superfoods is not an officially recognized term. There's no approval by EFSA or something like that about something being a superfood. Superfood is a term that grew up from the grassroots because some people had been assigning them to some products that have a good nutritional profile and then got this image of superfoods. There are a few examples here: aloe vera, acai berries, reishi mushrooms, and a number of other ones. And they have got this status of superfoods, at least with some people. Of course, they have some positive aspects in terms of the nutritional content, but in addition to that, they are also very natural, they are not processed, and people just like the idea. People get excited about these foods. People do not get excited about foods with technical health claims, but some people get excited about these foods here. So it's a quite different way in which the health trend manifests itself in consumer behavior, which is much more a system one approach to leading with healthy food than the one which is based on health claims. And in the olive oil case, actually I found this study here from some colleagues from Italy, which actually makes a very nice point, because they have been showing people products with a health claim on that, and then people were asked to evaluate the healthiness of the product, and the health claim has a positive impact on the perceived healthiness, as it should have. So we have the perceived healthiness on the horizontal axis, and then they looked at whether the perception of healthiness also translates into a higher probability of buying the product. And that was the case only for those people that at the same time got excited about the product. Because they were, at the same time when people looked at these products, they were monitored people's facial expression, which is an indicator of spontaneous emotional response to something. You can analyze that. And those people that got excited about the product had this spontaneous positive emotional response. For them, the perceived healthiness translated into wanting to buy the product, but not for the others. What that means is it's not enough that we communicate to people this is healthy and this is why. We also need to get people excited about that. We also need people to get this positive, spontaneous, positive reaction, system one in the Kahneman terms, in addition to the system two, before it has some relevance in the marketplace. So the health trend here, the public discourse on healthy food for many years has mainly followed the system two approach. We explain things to people, we expect them to understand it, to process it, and then to have that, and that should have an impact on their buying behavior, which has resulted in that many times the healthy eating is viewed as something which involves some trade-offs. You get more health, then it's less pleasurable or has other negative consequences. But at the same time, you also see examples that the healthy eating can be viewed as enjoyable, wonderful, not in contrast to something else. And that is where the opportunity is. Sustainability, the second trend I want to talk about, is newer. The discussion about the sustainability aspects of food production and food consumption are, compared to the health trend, newer. So it's still in an early phase. Also, sustainability is a complex concept. It has many dimensions. It's not completely clear what it means that a food product has been sustainably produced. And all that, of course, means that it's also more difficult for consumers, even if they want to make sustainable choices, to find out how that can be done. Still, we already in the marketplace have also in the sustainability area, for example, labels which may measure aspects of environmental impact or aspects of the ethics in food production. And we have a lot of attempts parallel to those that we have with regard to healthy eating, to encourage consumers to learn about the way food products have been produced in such a way that this then has an impact on their choices, that they become more sustainable. And we have had the same development with regard to the health trend, namely that consumers start perceiving some trade-offs. Consumers think, well, I have to reduce my meat consumption, but on the other hand, I like meat. So how do I balance these two things which are in my mind? Which are, both of them are important, also subjectively, and somehow I have to deal with these trade-offs here. This here is from a study on the role of eco-labeling, also with regard to olive oil. Eco-labeling is interpreted broadly here because what has been investigated here is whether it was labeled as organic, as PDO, and then the carbon footprint. In the strict sense, maybe only the carbon footprint is really an eco-label. But many people think that organic production is more sustainable than conventional production. And the PDO labeling originally, of course, was not a sustainability labeling, but of course one can argue that it has some sustainability aspects in there. The size of the bar is how much it contributed to people's choice in a simulated choice situation. And what we can see here is that the one that has the least impact is the carbon footprint, whereas the one that has the strongest impact is whether it's organic. And we can learn actually a lot about the success of organic production in the food sector, because organics has been one huge success story. Organics has been growing worldwide over a long period, even in times of crisis in most countries. The sales of organic products have still been going up. And why are people interested in buying organic products? Even though in most cases it looks the same, it smells the same, it tastes the same compared to conventional products. Actually, from a consumer behavior marketing perspective, that's quite an achievement. That the organic sector has been so successful. And it has something to do with that people regard organic production just as something positive. Not everybody, of course, but many people think that's just great. And if you ask them, why do you think it's great? People say, well, it's less pesticides, probably more healthy and so on. But people are actually a little bit vague when you ask them about why they think organics is so good. But organics is just good. And that comes back to my point. The success of organics is rooted in that it appeals only also from the system one perspective, where people just spontaneously think this is something which is good. And actually, one can investigate, and this is from a study that has done that, one can investigate whether organic consumption, or to which extent organic consumption is based on beliefs about whether organic is healthier, more sustainable, and so on, or whether people just think it's good. This study here, and there are a range of others, show, well, both of the things are happening. People that buy organic products regularly, they also form beliefs about superior health, more sustainability, and a number of other things, but that's not the whole story. We can explain the way in which organic products contribute to subjective well-being only if we at the same time also realize that people just have this spontaneous positive reaction to the idea of organic production. And that's not only dependent on that people think, that also means it's healthier and more sustainable, and the same thing here. I found this other example here about sustainability-related information, again in the broad sense also with regard to olive oil, where we had it's organic, we had the origin, and then we had from ancient trees. It's a mountain product, and it's produced with sustainable water use. All of these can have an impact, but the impact differs. And the organic is again the highest, and I think it's probably for the reasons already mentioned. And the Italian origin is high, but that's not strictly something about sustainability. But then the next highest after that one here is the thing from ancient trees. And I think one of the reasons for why that comes out, even though in objective terms it may not actually be the most relevant sustainability indicator, is that this appeals to imagery in the minds of people. They can imagine these old trees and how they are used to harvest the olives and the product that is coming out of it. And people just like that. It's a good idea. These are positive images. They result in this positive effect that then can have an impact on people's choices. So also, with regard to sustainability, even though it's a newer development compared to the health trend, the attempts that we currently have to encourage consumers to make more sustainable choices often also follow a system 2 approach where we appeal to people's reason, and please understand it's important for the planet to do this and that, even though we can see that certain sustainability parameters, and organics is probably the most prominent example here, also can elicit positive emotions, and for that reason are being chosen by consumers. And I think if we want to encourage more sustainable choices, we need to think more in terms of these opportunities to develop products that people spontaneously will think, this is really a wonderful idea, I really like that, and I would like to buy it. Authenticity is a third trend I want to address. That's actually a fuzzy concept, and it's not to be mixed up with authenticity in the objective sense, which is something about fraud and where the product comes from and so on. Authenticity here in the consumer behavior context is consumers' perception that the product is the real thing. It's not alienated, it's not spoiled, it's traditional, it's the way it always has been, it's the real thing in the mind of consumers. And it's not something that is very well defined, but it can nevertheless be a strong force in consumer decision making. And that's why it's important that we understand it. And it's obviously related to what people get to know about where the food comes from, both in terms of the production of the raw material and in terms of the processing that goes afterwards. And we have a lot of research about how consumers perceive different ways of producing food, and the general conclusion is the food that people like is the food that comes from small-scale units, that is not highly processed, that is artisanally produced, and the one that they don't like is from big units, industrially produced, and produced using technologies that they don't understand. And of course, it doesn't mean that on this background here, that food production should all appear in small-scale units. But it means that if we want to explain consumers how food is being produced in a way that consumers will like it, we need to explain, for example, that a large-scale production is an upscale version of something which started as an artisanal production, so people can understand it and relate to it, and if we do it well, even can develop a positive reaction to it. And it is tightly related to the emphasis that consumers, especially in Europe, have with regard to the naturalness of products. Natural in Europe is just good. It's not in the US, for example, where I am at the moment, it's not quite that strong. But in Europe, that's a very, very strong trend. And there's a lot of research now about how consumers perceive naturalness. It's nicely summarized in this diagram here. Naturalness in the consumer mind is very much linked to what is not in the product. There are no artificial ingredients, no preservatives, no additives, no artificial colors, no GMOs, of course. It's related to what's not being done, it's not highly processed, and it's related to what people think comes out. If it's natural, it's healthy, it's tasty, it's fresh, it's just good. So naturalness is a strong aspect of this authenticity trend, and everything we can do to make sure and to communicate to consumers that the food is natural will contribute to the success of that product in the marketplace. And local food, which is also part of the authenticity trend, is a related issue. Why do people buy local foods? Some people do it because they think they're just better, but then people have a whole range of other reasons for that. People may not like global value chains. People may want to support their local producer. So we have a bunch of motives here which all contribute to this general notion that local food is something good. I really like this idea of local food production. So the authenticity trend is driven by consumers' subjective links between what they think they know about how the food is being produced and the outcomes in terms of sensory qualities, health, and sustainability. And positive affect system 1 processes play a large role here in addition to these other that, of course, also play a role. So coming back to this diagram here and the thing about well-being, I think if we want to understand the opportunities that the green transition gives in the food sector, including the olive oil sector, we need to start from this perspective of subjective well-being and realize that we need both the satisfaction with the taste, with the healthiness, with the sustainability, and the happiness. We need to appeal to both System 1 and System 2 processes in the mind of the consumer. And what does that mean with regard to value creation when we put revised or new food products on the market? Because it's clear, the more important health and sustainability and authenticity become, it opens up for new possibilities for bringing new products on the market that appeal to these trends. But if we do that, we should take the opportunity perspective and not the barrier perspective, and not regard consumers as a barrier, but consumers as something that can get excited, if we do it right, about these trends here. And if we want to do that, it's very important that the value chain, the primary production and the processing and the retailing work together, because, as I will come to in a second, the communication about these various aspects in food production is a major aspect with regard to the later success of these products on the marketplace. And the country where I live, Denmark, is not one where olive oil is a traditional product. And our per capita consumption is still small. But even in a Danish supermarket, that's where I do most of my shopping here, if you look at the range of olive oil products and look at their prices, the most expensive one is maybe in this case here 7 times the price of the cheapest one. So there is room for product differentiation. There is room for value creation. And the more a country has expertise in olive oil also among consumers, the better these probabilities will become. But if you want to exploit that, and if you want to create added value for the consumer, of course we need to understand how the value is being created. And if you want to understand value creation from the consumer perspective, there are 3 factors that play a role. One is the product itself, obviously. And having been here for a few days and having seen the enormous variety that we have in olive oil products here, there is a lot of room for additional differentiation of olive oil products, also in countries like in Northern Europe, where olive oil is less traditional. Secondly, the communication. Because all these trends here, the healthiness, the sustainability, the authenticity, they are all questions of communication. You cannot see it, you cannot smell it, but you can communicate it. You need to communicate it, you need to communicate it in a credible way. Crucial. And the third part then is the consumer, him or herself. Because only when you use the olive oil in your cooking and meal preparation, of course, it starts really creating value for somebody. And as we all know, you can use it in many different ways. So the consumer, him or herself, is a major source of value creation, and we need to understand the way in which consumers do that if we want to develop the right products. And in this context, it's worth mentioning that the COVID-19 pandemic actually has resulted in changes in which people prepare meals. Because during the lockdown, many people were forced to prepare meals at home, which they normally would have eaten somewhere else. And there has been some research about how that has affected people, and by far most of those people where that happened think that they enjoyed the process. That they sort of rediscovered some of the joy in preparing meals at home in their own kitchen and eating them with their families. And we also have some evidence that some people become more mindful with regard to the choices they're doing. So we have ongoing changes with regard to how people use these products here, and we need to understand them in order to be successful on the marketplace. And having said that, of course, we should also mention that not everybody can be appealed to in that way here. This is from a study that just came out, segmenting olive oil consumers in 4 countries in a sort of very simple way here, but I'm only showing that to you because there's one segment which is called the price conscious, which basically buys the cheapest product. Of course, these people exist as well. They are not really in the market for differentiated products, but it's only a relatively small part of the market. And how big of a part of the market that is depends on, as we can see here, about how traditional the product is. It's smallest of the 4 countries here in Tunisia, and it's highest in Denmark. So the other 2 ones, which are called here quality seekers and guarantee seekers, they are in the market for new and differentiated products, even though they may need to look differently. So if you want to create value-added products based on these 3 trends here, we need to think in terms of these 3 trends here: health, sustainability, and authenticity. We need to think, as I've said several times now, in terms of both of these types of consumer reactions, the reasoned one and the more emotional, effective one. And if we want to develop new products on that, then we need to make sure that all the actors in the value chain cooperate with each other. And then we need to communicate to consumers what has been done. And I think it's an important aspect in the development of new processing technologies, new harvesting technologies, and other types of things that have been talked about here, that we always consider, can we explain this to consumers? And can we explain this to consumers in the way so that they will like it, and not regard it as something high-tech that they don't understand and which makes them skeptical. Just here before closing, if communication is so important, trust in food chain actors is very important. Because if people don't trust food chain actors, it's difficult to communicate for them. Trust in food chain actors has always been an issue. It has been going down for many years in Europe. But the good news is it seems it's starting to reverse. And it may also be related a little bit again to the COVID-19 pandemic, where people experienced both how sensitive actually society is with regard to a crisis like this, but at the same time experience that the food supply seemed to be pretty stable and not really endangered. Anyway, we can see that from 19 to 20, consumer trust in food chain actors actually has been starting to pick up. And we'll have to see whether that trend continues, but obviously it also depends on how food chain actors, what they make of that trend here. So my main message here, and coming back to olive oil here, is if we want to capitalize on these trends, we need to develop olive oil products that of course live up to these requirements of being healthy, sustainable, and authentic, that at the same time create enjoyment and positive effect. They need to be based on credible information about the production, about the product itself. They need to be produced in a way that is seen as transparent and neutral, so that they in the end can provide benefits to consumers during meal preparation and consumption. And that is what I wanted to tell you today, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Any question? Okay.
Okay, that was a great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So to what degree you expect some sort of bias from different consumer category. Let's say female, male, let's say affluent, non-affluent, educated, not educated. When it comes up to some of the assumptions that some of the discovery that you presented in your presentation.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Well, of course there are differences. No? We know, for example, that female consumers are more health-oriented than male consumers. And there are a few other examples like that. But we should not overestimate these differences, because even though it would be natural to assume that less educated consumers are more system one consumers, right? They more base their decisions on spontaneous reactions and not so much on a lot of conscious deliberation. But on the other hand, those more educated consumers that have more conscious deliberation also perceive more trade-offs and therefore become more skeptical in this regard to healthy and sustainable products. So when it comes to the demand for healthy and sustainable products, I think the real borderlines are somewhere else. They are more at the attitudinal level, they are more in the way people make decisions, but not so much in terms of the demographics.
Thank you very much for the presentation. So if I have pay attention that olive oil is like a product, authenticity, health, sustainability. What we are doing wrongly, because we are not connecting with our target. You know, we were speaking that young people they reduce the consumption of olive oil 20%. What we are doing wrongly, that even if we have everything to be a successful product, we aren't.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I'm not a specialist in olive oil. From the perspective of where I live in the northern part of Europe, where olive oil is not traditional. In our countries, actually, consumption of olive oil is going up. And the reason it's not going up faster than it does, in my opinion, are mainly two things. One is changes in the way in which consumers prepare meals are slow. So if you are used to using certain ingredients, it will only change very gradually. And there will be no sudden change in that one here. The other one is, I think, and that maybe sounds very trivial, it comes from somebody like me that works in food marketing, but I think the marketing of olive oil products could be improved dramatically. Because I think much of the communication, much of the way it is presented on the market is not very good. And I think looking at what I've seen here, the potential for meaningful differentiation of olive oil products is so much greater than what we currently see on the market.
Yes, I'd like to thank you for the presentation. It's very, very interesting. My name is Joseph Profacci. I'm the director of the North American Olive Oil Association. So like Denmark, we are not a traditional olive oil country. One slide in particular caught my attention, and I have a question for you. The creation of value. Who creates value? Value is critical because the competitive oils in the marketplace are so much cheaper than our product. Even the lowest grade of olive oil is much more expensive than canola oil, for instance. So creating value is our biggest challenge. So creating value through the product, I understand. Creating through communication, I understand. When you say the consumer creates the value, is there anything that we can do as an industry to facilitate the consumer creating value?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing obviously is understanding how consumers use the product today. Because that's the first step. Knowing that, of course, one can think about ways in which consumers could get more value out of the product. And that's always a bit uphill because it means you have to teach people something, right? No, most people don't really like being taught, right? But people get excited about recipes. People get excited about new food dishes. So if you think about this, these avenues towards more excitement in the food area, we have lots of these, I think, and then think olive oil into these. Then I think it could contribute to more value creation also in the household.
Okay, the last question.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much for your presentation. Like listening this for me, I'm a producer of organic biodynamic olive oil at a very small scale in a region, a small village in the south of Grunert. And what I can say is that in the last 15 years that I've been producing olive oil, I market it in Switzerland, which is not, as Denmark, an olive oil culture based nation. And they have a lot of like producing like a big production of sunflower, organic, for example, or kind of oils, and they're very proud of local things. But the consumption of olive oil is increasing. But what can I say is that this increasing of olive oil consumption is as well like directly proportional to what direct farmers, can bring to these markets. So more and more, for example, in my region, more people are producing olive oil and they're marketing directly into these markets through, for example, box schemes, community-supported agriculture systems. So all of these systems, when I listen and hear your presentation, and this like healthy, sustainable, and authenticity, for me, it's like what we have been probably not lobbying, but we have demanded all this time since years, like from farmers markets, direct, and so we can go and through this we provide healthy, sustainable, and authentic products. No, so of course I'm talking about a small part of the sector. So at the same time, I work, for example, with an app, Clever Harvest, and it's an application that tries to connect, and this is the word that I think we have to like underline, because happiness and well-being, probably it has to be with connection, and probably a word is every day by day more disconnected. Yeah. And when we like can arrive and target, and we can approach to products that are connected and that can bring us this connection to where the things has been done and the way in which it has been done, probably it brings some happiness to us.
Yeah, yeah, well, thanks for raising that. I completely agree. I think that these short supply chains, where products are sold locally at farmers' markets or at farm gate sales and so on, they live very highly up, especially with regard to authenticity, and they are much more apt to create these feelings of happiness and positive effect in the consumer than if it comes from a global supply chain. It's quite clear. Having said that, it's also clear that not the whole demand in the world can be satisfied by local supply chains. If we're talking about olive oil, obviously that's not an option. So we also need to tackle the question where products are being shipped over larger distances in order to satisfy the demand there. And there we have the issue that the story, the communication, the happiness does not move automatically with the product. Now, the product can be shipped, but the story that is with the product or with something's happening. The story that goes with the product, the positive emotion that is attached to the product does not travel with it automatically. That is a challenge. And it's something, that is something one needs to work with. And that's the really difficult part here when we move products over longer distances.
Okay, thank you very much.